A very good evening to everyone, and a warm welcome to this next session that is called the Structured Expert Dialogue. And this dialogue is going to be on the role and importance of multilateral and bilateral organizations, along with foundations, in India's decarbonization journey. So, in this particular session, we have multiple representatives from MBOs and foundations here, and each one of them is going to discuss their role and how they envisage India's decarbonization journey ahead. India definitely has a lot of opportunity to take bold action to enable economic prosperity and avert the worst effects of changing climate. So, without much ado, let's get into the session. It's my honor to invite Dr. Satish Kumar, Executive Director and President, AEEE. Sir, kindly enter the stage. Thank you. Dr. Satish, I'm going to hand it over to you from here.
Thank you, Abhas. And I would like to extend a very warm welcome and express my sincere thanks to our esteemed panel of speakers here. I'm going to start with Mr. John Smith-Sreen from USAID, who will be our first presenter of the evening. He is currently serving as the Director of the Indo-Pacific Office for USAID India, covering clean energy and climate, resilience and connectivity, supporting the Indo-Pacific strategy. A member of the Senior Foreign Service, John joined USAID in 2000 and has served in 7 missions, including India, Jordan, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Kenya, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Over to you, John. And if you can, please limit your interventions to about 7 to 8 minutes. I will remind, I think, at 8 minutes, just so that everybody can get the same amount of time. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you very much, Dr. Satish, and good evening to those of you joining from this part of the world. On behalf of the United States Agency for International Development, it's a real pleasure to speak at this important event on the role and importance of multilateral and bilateral organizations and foundations in India's decarbonization journey. Within hours after taking office last year, President Biden signed an executive order recommitting the United States to climate action and to working with the rest of the world on these urgent priorities. Since the early days of the Biden-Harris administration, we in USAID have been busy launching new initiatives, re-energizing existing ones, talking, strategizing, planning, and implementing partners across the world, including in India, on how together we can better reduce emissions, sustainably develop economies, and increase climate resilience. The discussion on India's decarbonization journey and the role organizations like USAID can play supports this overarching paradigm of combining protection of Mother Earth with the necessity of fueling the engines of economic growth and enhancing the resilience of people, communities, institutions, and ecosystems to withstand and recover from climate shocks and stresses. Recently, USAID's investments in South Asia have helped mobilize over $2.5 billion for clean energy development and supported integration of approximately 8 gigawatts of clean energy into the grid. To put that into perspective, 8 gigawatts of new generation can power roughly 5.2 million households. USAID has been implementing many bilateral and regional energy activities over the years, and I'd like to focus my remarks on 3 examples: MATRI, SARAP, and SAGE. Just last Friday, we held the final closeout event for USAID's Market Integration and Transformation for Energy Efficiency. MATRI was a 4-year partnership with India's Ministry of Power to promote energy efficiency, and we're proud to see today that India has many energy efficient policies, models, technologies, and practices that have become mainstreamed and serve as examples for the rest of the world. For example, MATRI supported construction of 12,000 green homes in cooperation with the Lucknow Development Authority. MATRI partnered with India's Bureau of Energy Efficiency to update energy-efficient building codes. And these codes are being used. They're contributing to world-class net zero energy facilities in India, including Nalanda University in Bihar and Telangana State Renewable Energy Development Corporation office building. MATRI partnered with the Energy Efficiency Services Limited on retrofitting 11,000 buildings for energy efficiency, including airports and metros and railways. And I've seen several of these investments recently at the Delhi Cantonment and New Delhi railway stations. Our public-private partnerships with EESL gave rise to a whole cadre of entrepreneurs who are now providing energy efficiency services and certification on buildings and appliances. Let me now switch to our new 5-year flagship activity known as the South Asia Regional Energy Partnership, or SARUP. SARUP builds on a lot of our earlier success in energy efficiency, greenhouse gas mitigation, improving distribution utilities, electric vehicles, and regional cooperation, among other topics. Under SARUP, USAID is looking forward to building on past investments and partnership, but also to expand our work by collaborating with new partners. We'll do this through advancing new technologies, attracting financing, partnering with the private sector, strengthening utilities, and focusing on renewable energy procurement, as well as enhancing the trade of electricity throughout South Asia. SARUP is in its first year of implementation and has just launched a partnership fund to help identify and scale up interesting clean energy business models and technologies. I anticipate you'll be hearing more about SARUP in the coming months and years. The final example I'd like to discuss is our partnership with the U.S. Department of Energy National Energy Labs under what's called the South Asia Group for Energy, SAGE. These labs include the National Renewable Energy Lab, Lawrence Berkeley, and Pacific Northwest. Through SAGE, our focus is to bring the best of U.S. knowledge and expertise and to partner with Indian and South Asian institutions that also bring the best of their knowledge and expertise. SAGE will continue to provide a formal platform for collaboration on resilient power grids, a clean energy transition, the decarbonization of energy-intensive sectors, and just transition from coal. Under SAGE, we recently published an initial analysis on the most feasible, least cost pathways to decarbonize the grid, transport, and building sectors in the region, and highlighted collaborative results on hybrid bioenergy systems and sustainable farming of bioenergy. In conclusion, I'd like to leave you with a few suggestions on combining social and economic growth opportunities in the clean energy space. As a development organization implementing clean and renewable energy and energy efficiency, USAID is also interested in inclusive economic growth that can be sustained over time. The following represents some general points for reflection. Reach out to youth. Youth can be effective climate activists and spokespersons for clean energy. Involve women in clean and renewable energy and energy efficiency activities. Facilitate avenues for private sector and civil society engagement, and explore opportunities to leverage funding. Use the power of the market and seek to transform markets. Look to non-traditional partners. Promote regional cooperation within the Indo-Pacific. Build greater comfort between and among government, private sector, and civil society. Celebrate success. There is a lot going well in India and across South Asia today. Build on that success, highlight positive examples, support and complement current efforts, create allies in the process, and improve cooperation and coordination. For decades, USAID has remained a steadfast partner with the government of India, local communities, the private sector, civil society, and the international community in addressing global climate change. This is also true in the other countries we're supporting under SARUP: Bangladesh, Bhutan, Maldives, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. We plan to continue scaling up our clean and renewable energy and energy efficiency investments in the future. Together, we can craft a future that is more energy efficient, less environmentally destructive, full of social and economic opportunity for all of us. Together, we can achieve net zero communities, cities, and countries. We look forward to continuing this journey together. Dhanyavad. Dr. Satish, back to you.
John, absolutely on the dot. Thank you so much. And from AEEE, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to USAID because AEEE was formed under a USAID program, ECO. So I think we have come a long way, but thank you for the support that we have received from USAID. My next speaker is Mr. Abhas Jha from the World Bank. Abhas is the practice manager, climate change and disaster risk management for the South Asia region within the urban resilience and land global practice for the World Bank. He leads a global team working on infrastructure, lending, technical assistance, and advisory services within the World Bank. Abhas works on cities, infrastructure, finance, and economics, technology, climate risk and resilience, and public policy. Over to you, Abhas.
Thank you very much, Satish. I hope you can hear me. I'm just wondering how I share my screen. Slides are uploaded. Yeah, there we go. So I presume you can see my slides and you can see me. So first of all, thank you for the invitation, AEEE, and to Satish. And it's a privilege to be as part of this distinguished panel. So I want to go very quickly through my presentation so that we have time for discussion. So obviously, we begin with India's aspiration to become a $10 trillion economy by 2030. And I think climate change has to be part of that story, and it has to be embedded and sort of mainstreamed in development policy in India. A few years back, climate change was something that we would think of in the future, but the truth is that India is being hit hard. India and other countries are being hit hard today by the impacts of climate change. So this next slide is a paper that was recently published by Dr. Fatih El-Tahir of MIT. And frankly, it's one of the scariest charts that I've seen. So this shows the prevalence of deadly heat waves in the subcontinent by the end of the century. And if you look at even the low emission scenario, you can see that the entire Indo-Gangetic plain will have several days with a wet bulb temperature where human habitation will not be possible. So it is a very, very grim scenario. I think India's COP26 announcements were very welcome. And as John said, there are a lot of good things that are happening on climate change in terms of policy by the government of India and across South Asia, frankly. The one thing I would like to say here is that to us, the 2070 target is interesting, but perhaps not that meaningful. I think what is really important is what India does in the next 10 years. That will have a much greater significance, not just for India's global development trajectory, but also for the world. In terms of the World Bank, we support to India on climate change. We break it down into these 5 categories. So it's climate, smart agriculture, water and energy, the decarbonization part, which is the energy industry and transport. I think cities and urbanization is going to be a very critical part of the decarbonization story. India is one of the fastest urbanizing regions in the world. Then the issue of mainstreaming resilience, which is that every single sector now needs to think about climate change adaptation. If you think about it, any infrastructure that's being put in place today has to be built for a world that is 2 degrees or more warmer. And that has never been the case previously in human history. Last time the world was 2 degrees warmer, dinosaurs were roaming the planet. So this is a completely new world we are entering. And then the final piece would be the financing of climate action, which I'll talk about as we go in. Now, I think these statistics I don't need to repeat. Most of you know this, but India is the third largest electricity consumer. The IEA predicts that India will be the fastest growing electricity market in the whole world, even surpassing China. 40% of the GHG emissions come from the electricity production. So this is obviously going to be a critical part of that. The second part is the transport, which accounts for 13%. And then you have the industries where you have iron, steel, cement. So each of these, I think, we need to sort of unpack and see what the strategy needs to be for these. In terms of the World Bank's support, we are working across all these sectors, whether it's on power supply, renewable energy, energy efficiency, e-mobility, decarbonizing. I'm very happy to see Mr. Jain here, and I just want to say one thing about just transitions is that, when we talk about phasing out coal, just the scale of the task in India is just mind-boggling. Other countries have done it like Poland, but these are very small countries. When we start talking about India and China, the amount of people who are directly employed by coal, the amount of states that depend on coal revenue, Indian Railways is dependent on coal revenue. When we talk about just transition, we are really in complex territory. So this has to be navigated very carefully. In terms of climate finance, India's NDC needs about $2.5 trillion by 2030, where I think agencies like the World Bank and other multilaterals and bilaterals can be helpful is on two things. So one is standardizing the sort of the MRV part of it, the monitoring, reporting, and verification. I think there's still gaps. You see evidence of what we call greenwashing, which is floating green bonds that are not really green. So I think that is one area which could be strengthened. The second, I think, is this whole issue of prioritization of investments in the climate sector. So the Prime Minister announced this $1 trillion amount of financing needed by India at Glasgow. The question is that now with that figure, you need to start breaking down in terms of where you get your most bang for your buck in terms of reducing emissions, promoting growth, and so on and so forth. So almost like the McKinsey cost curves, we need some kind of exercise to prioritize sectors and then within those sectors, prioritize investments. And that is one area where agencies like the World Bank can be of help to India. I think I can go quickly through this. This is sort of the whole paradigm of climate finance, which includes carbon pricing, taxation. As you know, the rules for under Article 6 for carbon trading were finalized in Glasgow. So this is a market that's set to explode. And India should and I'm sure will take advantage of that. As I mentioned, we are working, the World Bank is working across all these sectors in India, whether it's urbanization or climate smart agriculture or energy. And if we have time, we can talk about it in the discussion part of the. Now, this is the part where I would like to spend a little bit more time, which is that some questions that I hope we can discuss. So the first is that when we talk about decarbonization, there are several low-hanging fruit where I think action would be relatively easy. Let me give you two examples. One is the PMAY, which is the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which is probably one of the largest affordable housing schemes in the world. We build up to 10 million units of housing under this program. Now, if we were to shift to climate-friendly housing under this program, it's a triple win. We are building affordable housing, we are generating good jobs, and we are taking action on climate. So this, according to me, would be one of the best things that the government of India could do. Similarly, on rooftop solar. So the government of India had a target of 40 gigawatts by the end of this year. It's unlikely to be achieved for various reasons, which we don't have time to get into. But I think rooftop solar, there's much we can do to boost our achievements in that area. Second point is on private finance. So, there are different estimates of how much India needs in various trillions of dollars. without going into the specifics, I do want to say that we need to start thinking about how we can use scarce public resources or resources from agencies like the World Bank to better crowd in private finance. And there, the concept of profit pools, I think, is a good idea, where you look at the value chain. Let's say you take one industry like solar, you start going across the value chain and then seeing where the profit margins are. So that gives you an idea of which sections of the value chain give you the most leverage by using public finance. I think we need to start thinking about areas like hydrogen, where the government of India, of course, has a very ambitious hydrogen program. But how do you use, for example, subsidies is something that needs to be looked at. There's a Bloomberg New Energy Finance report that just came out this week that estimated that the electrolyzers for hydrogen, the demand is going to go 4 times just this in 2022. So these are the kind of issues that we need to analyze, that how do we use public policy. And then when you talk about cement, for example, 50% of cement is bought by governments all over the world. So this is an area where public procurement can make a difference. If for example, you start prioritizing the purchase of green cement. And finally, the rule of thumb that people say is that first clean up the grid and then electrify everything. So under that, the last 10 to 15% of the decarbonization is going to be the hardest part. Areas like petrochemicals. And there, that's where also we need to start thinking about what government policies would be the most effective. So let me stop here, and thanks very much again. Back to you, Satish.
Thank you very much, Abhas. As you talked about the MIT study, I was reminded of the opening chapter of The Ministry of the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson, and where I think the setting is Lucknow, and India is suffering a massive heat wave with millions of people dying. So, I mean, maybe that's something that we definitely need to keep in mind and definitely need to plan, because I think with each passing year, I think India is becoming more vulnerable. So thank you, Abhas, for I think your intervention and highlighting some of the work that World Bank is doing, and also in terms of what are some of the key messages that you wanted to share with us. I'm going to invite Matushi Sengupta from the MacArthur Foundation. Matushi heads the India office of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Her primary focus is on effectively executing the foundation's climate change mitigation strategy for India. With more than 25 years of leadership experience in the social sector, she has been actively involved in building and executing organizational and program strategy, developing program portfolios, and evaluating the impact of development interventions across a spectrum of causes and geographies. Over to you, Matushi.
Thank you so much, Satish. Thank you for inviting me to this really, really interesting platform of, what philanthropy can do towards decarbonization goals of the country. So, as you mentioned, I represent the MacArthur Foundation in India. And just to go back a few years, in 2014, MacArthur, in fact, decided to adopt a series of big bets, ideas that we think could have transformative impact on human lives and livelihoods. And of the list of big bets that were identified, climate solutions, in fact, was the largest one. And we decided to focus on 2 geographies, 3 earlier, but now we're largely focusing on 2 geographies, the United States and India as such. Mainly from the point of view of, looking at ways to keep greenhouse gas emissions within levels that could keep climate change at the minimum, really. So the overall objective of the program actually is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions so that the global temperature increase can stay below 2 degrees Celsius. But to do this, we in fact decided to look at the country contexts to figure out what would make sense as we move forward. And so the program in the United States, in fact, looks very different from the way the foundation has supported civil society interventions in the country here in India. And here in India, basically, the grants have largely been made available to reputed civil society organizations like AEEE and many others. Such happy to talk about each of them, but mainly to civil society organizations to support policymakers at the state level and at the national level to develop policies which follow a low carbon growth path, because we genuinely believe that that India's economic and social aspirations should be dually met, and at the same time, climate goals should actually encompass these two sets of targets. So to keep this in view, the point of intervention was a momentous one for us. India had set out its first set of NDCs, and in fact, our grant making focused on the first two quantitative targets, which is about reducing carbon intensity, as well as rolling out, looking at a higher participation of renewable energy in the country's energy mix. And I'm very proud to say that many of our, in fact, all our grantees have played a very, very important role in terms of just unpacking these two targets, trying to figure out what needs to be done at various levels to make sure that this is, the country can achieve its own the climate goals that it had set for itself. In terms of the themes that the foundation has focused on, largely, we can broadly group them in 4 areas. The first one looks at supporting the achievement of the NDC targets, and also to unpack issues and elements that need to be addressed if those targets were to be made a reality downline, which means that, looking from the national target of a certain level of RE, what does it really translate into as far as the states are concerned. The second area that we looked at was to just test and pilot some market-based interventions to see if the private sector could actually play a bigger role in terms of bringing in reducing the level of greenhouse gas emissions. Third area, which has also been a critical one, looks at faster rollout of rooftop solar in the country. And the fourth area of work that the foundation has supported is in the field of energy efficiency, which we think will play a very, very critical role in enabling the country achieve its climate goals. So these are the 4 main areas. And we went through a midterm review of the strategy in 2020, and in fact, explored the type of developments that had happened in the last 5 years. It's really very enthusing to see the number of philanthropic organizations who have come forward to support action on climate change in the last 5 years. The country's commitment to strong goals on renewable energy and reduced reduction in carbon intensity are really, really positive steps that have taken place, among others. And in fact, we think that it's been a really, really interesting journey in the last 5 years. The field has sort of exploded with many, many new organizations taking up the issue of climate change mitigation as well. So in 2020, when we actually went through the review of our strategy, we sort of came out to say that the strategy remains robust, but there were 2 areas that we wanted to deepen our engagement. One was to move more resources at the state level, because we think Indian states will have a very important role to play in enabling the country achieve its national targets. And the second area of shift that took place in 2020 was to bring in a stronger focus on just transition. And basically to say that, how do you make this process of transition inclusive and socially responsible? So, in fact, there have been grants to certain civil society organizations as such to look at ways by which they could work with the state governments like Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, and to figure out ways by which the communities which are likely to be disproportionately affected by this clean energy transition can be effectively supported. So we are very early in that particular journey in terms of looking at equity and just transitions as such, and still learning as we move forward. But we think it's an important element to be looked at as we, support various policymakers and civil society organizations in the clean energy goals. So I'll pause there and take questions as required. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matushi, and for your short and crisp remarks and how MacArthur has actually gone through its own journey in terms of making a pretty significant contribution in India's decarbonization journey. Thank you for that. Now I invite Dr. Anshu Bhardwaj from the Shakti Foundation. Anshu was a member of the Indian Administrative Services 1992 batch. He worked in the state government in various capacities. He has expertise in technology and policy aspects of the energy and environmental sectors, and he's a member of several government committees in these areas. Over to you, Anshu.
Thank you very much, Satish. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me. The topic suggested the role of multilateral and bilateral organizations in India's clean transition journey. And I think the list of speakers that you have put together is very, very, all of them represent organizations who have made a major impact in India's journey over the last 15 years. So thank you for having me as part of this workshop. I'll quickly talk about what Shakti has done and what we plan to do in the coming year and going forward. Shakti, as you know, is a philanthropic organization which has worked in climate action and clean energy over the last more than 10 years. Shakti began working in this space when climate was still a very fringe subject and nobody used to talk about climate. And bit by bit, I'm really proud that we worked to make a case for climate action and brought it to the mainstream. And finally, it led to an announcement in last COP by the Indian government on net zero commitments for 2070 and interim milestones for 2030. I believe those were important announcements which have completely shifted the narrative. The case for climate action is now done. And now climate is very much a mainstream component of how our lives and our economy will unfold over the next several decades. As far as Shakti goes, we broadly have classified our work into 6 or 7 broad buckets and 4 cross-cutting themes which cut across these areas. One, of course, is the pathways to get to net zero. So while the Indian government announced net zero, there need to be robust policy packages of how we will get there. And that includes energy economy modeling and looking at various sectors. So that's one very important component of our work this year. Second one, of course, the high RE pathways continues to be an important component of our work. The interim milestones of 500 gigawatts for 2030. I believe the first target is how do we get there? And going beyond that, when we look at further expansion of RE for 2050 and beyond, is something that we all should explore, especially because with rapid electrification, rapid decline in cost of RE, a lot of demand is being shifting to RE from thermal sectors, from transport, industry sectors, and therefore the need to have more and more ambitious push for RE. So that continues to be our focus. We are looking at both central and state level initiatives to achieve these targets. Industrial decarbonization is a very important area. Till now, a lot of focus had been on energy efficiency, especially the PAT program. I believe a lot of the low-hanging fruits which could be achieved have been tapped. And Indian industry is now comparable with the best in the world in terms of efficiency standards. And you know it better than me because you have played a very important role in this area. I believe now we need to look at new technologies, going beyond efficiency into technology transitions, and that should be a focus going forward. The next one is cooling. I believe this is one area which has not received the desired attention over last few years. The future demand for cooling is immense, and studies by institutions, including AEEE, have highlighted the cooling action plan is in place, and Mr. Jain, when he was in MoEFCC, thanks to his leadership, ICAP saw the light of the day. But a lot more work needs to be done in cooling, and that is one of our focus areas this year and going forward. In transport, electric mobility is a very important area. Shakti is hosting the EMI platform, Electric Mobility Initiative, which is a multi-funder initiative to promote electric mobility across all segments, and we are committed to that. This year, we are also expanding into clean freight. I believe freight, again, has not received attention. A lot of work needs to be done in freight. Studies suggest there's a growing demand, and we are looking at all options, including electric mobility and hydrogen, and in how to decarbonize freight. Finally, the one very important area linked to India's energy security and manufacturing is the issue of raw materials and supply chains. While we talk about, the clean transition is going to be very significant and massive, and linked to that is how do we secure the supply chain and raw materials, especially in manufacturing. So that's the last area which Shakti is planning to work in. Linked to that, there are 3 or 4 cross-cutting themes, which I'll quickly enumerate in a minute. One is the role of data, AI in climate change. I think the public policy and decision making can really be enriched by having data mining and computational tools and AI as a cross-cutting theme across all the previous themes which I talked about. Second is role of modeling. We are already working with NITI Aayog to strengthen modeling, and how do we enrich decision making in climate action by more sophisticated models and computational tools. Third is the area of cities. I think cities are very important demand centers, and how do we make sure that the demand in cities is met in as low carbon manner as possible. And finally, the most important and obvious cross-cutting theme is finance. Everything boils down to finance, how much finance is required, and how do we ensure climate finance is made available to the implementing agencies. So that's a very brief snapshot of Shakti's plans going in this year and going forward. And with that, I'll stop. I'll save you a minute and I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anshu, for a whirlwind tour of, I think, Shakti's current strategy and your plan for how you want to operate in future. And I do want to take this opportunity to thank both Shakti as well as MacArthur. And just, I think it's reflective of the Indian nonprofit ecosystem, where I think many of the organizations, I think, who are speaking at this forum has also helped bring AEEE to life, and then has continued to support us over the last 13 or 14 years. So thank you for your support. Moving on, I'm going to invite Mr. Shirish Sinha from the Children Investment Fund Foundation. He's the acting executive director at CIF, and Shirish has over 20 years of experience in policy making and project program implementation in energy, climate change, and sustainable development policy. Over to you, Shirish.
Thank you, Satish. I hope the audio is clear, and also somehow I can't see the video, but I'll keep going ahead. First of all, thank you so much for having me here for this session. Very interesting discussion that's happened so far, and also the opportunity for us to share some of our perspective of what we see are the important elements of India's decarbonization pathway, and our own experience of engaging in that. So just to kind of give a quick presentation through a couple of slides, if we could move to the next one. Why SIF? And as our name suggests, we are set up as a children's foundation, and we decided in 2010 to start working on climate. And over a period of time, we have become one of the world's largest philanthropies, working on both the issues of children as well as climate. And I think our approach is kind of summed up very well with the way Chris Horn, who set up the foundation, has basically said that our role as a foundation is to help solve some of the problems that are faced by children, including the impacts of climate change going forward for the future generation and the current generation. And it's not just about making grants, but essentially about solving those problems that are faced by them. And as a foundation, our approach largely have been very ambitious, and we tend to look at a systemic change as a key driver for us to happen. But at the same time, what we also do through our various different programs, which I'll kind of highlight through what we do globally and what we do here in India, we try to take a lot of early risks, and I think that's kind of drives our approach. But one of the key things for us to move forward and drive is that strengthening local leadership and strengthening domestic think tanks and institutions is something that we strongly believe in. And at the same time, we want to basically make sure that we are investing through our grants to do the field building that is really required. And there are a couple of examples that I'll show what we are currently doing here in India. And that kind of drives the way we have set up our program all over the world. And that's what takes us, if I could move to the next slide, will kind of show what we are really doing globally. So this is a kind of a snapshot of our current investments that happen and the programs that we are doing across different regions in the world. And our program has grown organically. We started working with Europe. The program then expanded to China. And in 2016, a decision was taken that we want to focus more on Asia, and therefore that's how our program in Southeast Asia, South Asia, and then in India, which was one of the most recent programs for SIF on climate, actually started. We also now in the process of growing our portfolio of work in Africa with South Africa program, and also setting up some of the regional re-granting institutions in these regions. So across Europe, across our work that we do in Southeast Asia, South Africa, and in Africa and China, we are basically working a lot through re-granting institutions and setting up global initiatives and then the funds that are required. And that's some of the examples are on the screen for us to look at. So in 2018, our board decided that we could start engaging on our climate program and develop a strategy for us in India. And I think some of the rationale around why we started were very much kind of captured by what Matoshi said and Anshu was talking about as a rationale for India's opportunity for us to invest on climate action in India. So we basically took a decision that India becomes important, that most of the existing commitments under the Paris Agreement at that point of time were already signaling, and most of the analysis already showed that India was actually on path to be compatible to a 2-degree centigrade scenario through its existing commitments that it has made. And now if you look at post-COP26, that is really reiterated and much more stronger that has come, both through the enhanced ambition that it has announced for what Mr. Jha was also mentioning about 2030 as a target, and also even if 2070 seems long-term, at least it really sets the action that is needed to basically happen. And we felt that SIF, through our strategy, if we can go to the next slide, essentially that we will be an opportunity to really see if that curve of India's trajectory of ambitious action can lead towards becoming more 1.5 degree compatibility. And that kind of set our strategy for 5 years, which is from 2019 to 24. And we said that what really is needed from India's development scenario is, with the ambition that it wants to be a $10 trillion economy by 2030, it also has an opportunity to make several of those investments in sectoral solutions, which can actually lead it towards a more low carbon and climate compatible development. So that's why we said our theory of change and our way we have planned this invest strategy is that we are totally aligned with the India's climate policy and ambition and action that it is undertaking. And we broadly divided them into 9 areas of work. And as you will see, we work on range of topics now. We've been working on power sector reforms and clean energy transition in selected states, especially in Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, and very recently we started working in Rajasthan. The idea is to work more with distribution utilities as well as provide technical support which is needed to utilities. So, for example, in Tamil Nadu, with the help of National Renewable Energy Lab, who's one of our partners in this project, we help them in terms of the overall grid and related planning for variable renewables to come into the system. In Maharashtra and now in Tamil Nadu, we're also helping with the state in terms of their long-term policy towards energy transition. Sheetal is a project, Satish, you are very much part of, and AEEE together with Terry and CWSB leading this work. And this was really an opportunity-driven investment that we developed, saying that India Cooling Action Plan was just released, and we said this is the right opportunity for us to invest. And that's how we brought together this group of 3 think tank partnership to provide technical assistance support that is required for ICAP implementation. So we work now on electric mobility and on transport decarbonization. And then there are other sector work that we have started to do in engagement. Now, the way I kind of showed in the slide, what you see as green boxes are areas which are our long-term investments going up to 4 to 5 years now, whereas all the other which are in light blue are basically areas where we are doing proof of concepts. These are strategies that we want to test, and we want to see whether these can be scaled up or not with the help of once we've started doing the implementation. And so we are at the different stage with each of these investments over the next 2 years, which will allow us to decide the future of our funding and grant making in India. But essentially we identified these 8 areas or 9 areas of work very clearly as areas which requires attention. And these have been really covered quite well with the other speakers, that these are the areas of opportunity. So on industrial decarbonization, as Anshu was mentioning, we've actually started this initiative with the idea that we need to move towards looking at material circularity, looking at fuel transition and fuel switching as a direct way of intervention, because much of the work on energy efficiency in large industries like steel and cement has already been achieved. But what we're also looking at is the allied MSMEs in these sectors to see what opportunities and how we can essentially bring these elements together. Our cities work is very new, and we've just started to look at supporting NIUA in terms of the work that they do with CSCAF, which is the framework developed by the ministry, and also looking at technical assistance support to a few of the cities. In addition to the work that we are starting, the work that we're doing on clean air is something which has become really important and growing in our work across 5 states now, and that is really giving us some very clear outcomes. So if I could just move to the last slide and just to show some of the key things we are basically doing. One, of course, as I talked about, was Sheetal, which is an initiative and role that, as I said in the beginning, we try to play is to bring together the partners, which we felt were necessary. And that's one example where we brought 3 very different institutions to work together on the issue of ICAP implementation. And we're seeing some interesting results, whether it's related to the ECBC implementation at the state level, whether it's cold chain work that AEEE is leading, and some of the guidance that is happening in terms of efficiency improvements for appliances. We also focus a lot on data transparency and accountability, and an issue that Anshu was referring to. And one of the things that we have done in our air quality work is to support accountability mechanism to see what is the cities doing with respect to NCAP implementation, how are they spending the money. So it just provides a very robust analysis which makes it easier for policymakers to decide and look at what solutions needs to be looked at. The other interesting work is the work on the power sector. We started mostly as an internal need for us to track what is happening in the power sector. But this platform, which is managed by Vasudha, has become so easy to use that it is now transitioning into NITI Aayog, which become part of the India Energy Dashboard. So that's a kind of investment that we are making essentially to make sure that it is fully on the lines of that. And taking a quickly 30 seconds each, the work on electric mobility, some of you might have seen recently a campaign that NITI Aayog launched called Shunya. This is our work on electric mobility, which is led by RMI. And the whole idea is that the last mile delivery vehicles, both for urban freight as well as for cab aggregators, shift towards electric mobility. So this campaign is something which is now supported by over 100 of the EV infrastructure partners, and therefore is leading towards a good initiative. And we're also helping states like Delhi for the implementation of EV policy, as well as Maharashtra in their formulation and implementation of the policy. On agriculture, it's something which is very new, but some very interesting developments. We've been working in UP and Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh with the partners. And already we are seeing some good work. The evidence from the field is being translated into policy shifts and change. Gujarat on the weekend announced a very significant budgetary allocation to scale up natural farming in the state. And in the budget this morning, the finance minister also announced an additional new national level program with clear funding and program for in the Ganga corridor to start with. And finally, there's a lot of discussion on just transition. We started supporting this work about a year and a half back in Jharkhand to understand what really is the opportunities for us to focus. And one thing that we have really tried to do is, moving forward, we are leading a SIF-wide development of a strategy. And the idea is that we strongly believe that this is the approach of just transition in the global south is going to be far more different from what our general experience globally is about. And this is an opportunity for us to drive on the intellectual capacity of global south and institutions in the global south to develop a global initiative on just transition. And because our demand for transition is going to be extremely difficult. So that in sum up, Satish wanted to share what we are doing and what our plans are going forward in future. And with this, I hand it back to you. And apologies, I think somehow my video has stopped working, so couldn't be seen on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirish. I know that I think we are really pressed for time, and I do want to give Mr. Jain an opportunity to share his thoughts and maybe engage in a little bit of discussion in the limited amount of time that we have. So I'm requesting both Melanie and Tobias to see, I think, whatever they can do to save us a few minutes. Melanie, I'm skipping the introduction to save some time. Melanie is with the International Energy Agency, and she works with policymakers in Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, Mexico, South Africa, Thailand. So she's very well versed with the developmental countries' issues. Over to you, Melanie.
Thank you very much, Satish, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'd like to build on a couple of the areas of opportunity that on energy efficiency that Brian introduced in his keynote address earlier today, and I'll be as quick as I can. So, as Brian mentioned, 400 milestones in the IEA's net zero roadmap. Of those, 40 relate specifically to energy efficiency, and I'll pick up on some of those that are particularly relevant to India. So in terms of new buildings globally, most of the increase in floor area is in hot climates, like here in India, as Abhas showed us earlier. And in many cases, the coverage of building standards is low, and this is one of the principal tools available to make long-term improvements. Of course, the thermal performance of buildings needs to be as good as possible to minimize the electricity needed to power cooling equipment, as we all know. India, of course, has building codes for commercial and more recently residential buildings, and we're working with officials to develop a roadmap for the rollout of the residential codes, which is a very interesting piece of work. But, of course, India is not alone, and keeping cool is a growing need. And as you know all too well, it's not a luxury, but it's a necessity for health and productivity in schools and businesses. And in parts of the world where it's hot every day, as we saw on the chart earlier, only about 8% of the 2.8 billion people living in these areas have an air conditioner. So perhaps it's not surprising that cooling is outpacing all other aspects of building energy demand. And of course, it's not just an issue of environment and health, it's one of economy. Like I say, it's not a luxury. So efficiency can reduce peak electricity demand, which can significantly lower overall electricity system costs, and therefore the bills to consumers and business. So we estimate that here in India, Without further action, cooling could represent more than 40% of peak electricity demand. But that can be halved if we use more efficient equipment that's already available today. So, and like I said, the good news is that we can double the efficiency of air conditioning using existing products. We don't have to wait for new technologies, but we do absolutely have to put very strong policies in place and update them regularly. And more good news, and contrary to common belief, the products don't need to cost more. We can see by looking at market data comparing price and efficiency that more efficient products may cost more, they can cost more, but they don't have to. It's generally other features, including brand, that drive the prices up. So appliance policy is well understood. It's one of the longest running types of energy efficiency activity globally, and the longest running programs that rely on minimum energy performance standards to remove the worst products from the market, and labels to help consumers understand running costs and choose the most efficient appliances. These programs in some parts of the world have saved 15% of the country's total electricity consumption. And it might surprise people to know that in 2019, annual global electricity demand was reduced by at least 1,600 terawatt hours, equivalent to the total production of wind and solar energy in the top 10 producers. And that was just by appliance policies. And of course, they carry on delivering over decades of more efficient products are continually entering the markets, as long as we have that strong policy in place and we regularly upgrade the requirements. As Brian introduced earlier, it's because of these programs are so effective, but that they could do so much more, that the UK government, as COP26 president, decided, working in partnership with us and others, to push this call to action on energy efficiency. And we're working now, post-COP, through the Super Efficient Appliance Deployment Initiative, which is co-led by India, to lay out plans about how to double the efficiency of key products over this decade. So India has all the ingredients in place, and one in particular that other countries envy, and that's the business model developed through Energy Efficiency Services Limited. So minimum energy performance standards and energy consumption labels are essential, but so is a mechanism for rolling out more efficient products at scale. And this, of course, was done in India first through Ujala, and of course other products have followed. And the lesson we've learned from elsewhere is that it's most effective to link the MEPs, the labels, and the incentives, so it's clear to all, particularly manufacturers, where the market is heading, so that they can prepare. And this is one of the key features of Japan's world-famous Top Runner program. So linking the measures rather than keeping them in separate silos helps transform markets, helps keep up with what's happening globally. And we talk about this as a ladder, where the lower rungs of the MEPs and the labels are in between and the incentives are at the top end. And the more alignment there is globally on these ladders, the larger the markets are for efficient products. And this, of course, is attractive for manufacturers because they have easier access to markets. So aligning appliance policies at rigorous levels in India, for example, opens up export markets for Indian manufacturers. A great example of how this has worked is in Thailand, which was almost unknown as an appliance manufacturer, particularly an air conditioning manufacturer 10 years ago, but now is second only to China in terms of global market share. And this was done through working on regional markets for efficient products, which increased the opportunity for Thai manufacturers. Indian manufacturers could benefit in a similar way. Just very briefly, I'd like to, a couple of points on industry. There's as our speaker from SIF said, there's much discussion about the hard to abate sectors like iron and steel and cement. But in our analysis, we show that 70% of energy efficiency opportunities that we need to achieve are in the lighter industries, particularly those using large numbers of electric motors, steam raising equipment, drying technologies. And these are often very inefficient because operators don't know about efficiency. Savings to individual factories are small. It's only when you scale them up and realize that there are hundreds of thousands of similar individual investments needed that you realize how important they are to the energy system as a whole. These are sectors like pulp and paper, textiles, food and drink. They employ vast numbers of people and their survival is critical to the economy. And unfortunately, banks usually aren't interested in these investments because they're too small and regarded as being complicated. And of course, the factory operators themselves don't invest because they have more pressing problems. So the question is to everybody, what lessons can we take from India's experience with Energy Efficiency Services Limited to extend that to light industries? They could take both technical and financial risk by understanding the solutions thoroughly. They could aggregate savings to gain credits in energy saving certificates or carbon markets, as long as market design allows that type of activity. And beyond EESL, there's also a potential role for specialist or local ESCOs working at the sector and the cluster level. So it's these forms of business model that we hope to be working with Indian colleagues on in the coming year. So if anybody has any ideas or examples they'd like to share, they would be very much welcome. I need to stop, I know, but I'd just like to say that these things aren't a luxury either. So by not having very stringent policies, everybody, people, businesses, governments lose out. Because as Brian said in his keynote opportunities, energy efficiency saves money, reduces emissions, improves health, helps us grow economies and to create jobs. And Satish, I'll finish there in the interest of time.
Thank you, Melanie, for your remarks. I'm moving right along. So our last intervention is by none other than Mr. Tobias Winter. And Tobias is an energy economist, and he leads the support office of the Indo-German Energy Forum. And he works on collaborative research and development with participation from India and Germany. Over to you, Tobias. And if you can just limit your remarks to 7-8 minutes so that we can get over to Mr. Anil Jain as quickly as we can.
Thank you very much, Satish ji. I hope I'll be done in maybe even 2 minutes. And let me first of all thank you, Dr. Sri Anil Jain, sir. Thank you so much for honoring us with your presence today. Us, when I speak us, I mean GIZ Development Corporation, KfW Development Bank, and PTB, which are the three main Indo-German development cooperation agencies or development banks working here in India since more than 60 years on the topic of energy, actually, even 10 years before in energy efficiency steel. Let me just very, very briefly give everyone a short glimpse of what is being discussed right now and what is the role of GIZ. I'll make it really fast. It's actually very easy. We are government agencies, so it's nothing else than implement what both governments decide. The process with Germany is that on prime minister's level, there is meetings, official meetings, at least each 2 years happening either in Germany or in India. And on minister level, secretary level, it is happening actually twice per year. What are the main topics from the German side? That does not necessarily mean that these need to be the topics for the Indian side. But yes, Germany aims for carbon neutrality until 45, coal phase out legally decided till 38, and now with the new government in place, 2030 discussed, complete nuclear phase out in 22. So in total, 37 nuclear power plants had been already built in Germany, and there's 3 left which need to be shut down by the end of the year. And now the big new thing, ramp up of a green hydrogen economy. And Germany has no doubt that it will remain a net importer of energy. So 80–90% is envisioned and needs to actually come from outside. So Germany is really interested in ramping up the global hydrogen economy. And that brings us to the topics being discussed with government of India. I just put some words. I asked my colleagues, what do you think we are working in? So there's a lot of people in KfW and GIZ India working. And I'd say the smaller key or buzzwords are the ones where GIZ, KfW, PTB are already working on jointly with government of India. Nothing is being done without agreement from the Indian side. And the 3 big topics here are, so to say, the topics discussed which may come on the agenda or are under progress in terms of further cooperation: green hydrogen, energy storage, just transition. We have heard these words a couple of times before. And with this, I leave it So honored, Dr. Sri Anil Jain, that you're here with us today. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you for being so gracious with your short and crisp remarks, Tobias. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for being accommodating. And I'm sure we are all now waiting to hear from our guest of honor, Dr. Anil Kumar Jain, Secretary, Ministry of Coal, to share his perspectives on India's energy policy, decarbonization, and just transitions, and engage with other presenters over the next maybe 25-30 minutes that we have got. Very briefly, Dr. Anil Jain is an IAS officer of 1986 batch, is the secretary at the Coal Ministry and a key figure in shaping India's decarbonization and just transition strategy. Dr. Jain has served as energy advisor at NITI Aayog, specializing in the energy sector, and was instrumental in initiating key activities such as India energy security scenarios that many of us actually refer to, and National Energy Policy. And at the MoEFCC, as additional secretary, he helped launch the India Cooling Action Plan through a multi-stakeholder collaboration approach, and many of the organizations were involved in that. So it is our pleasure to have you at this dialogue. And I do want to take this opportunity to congratulate you on getting your PhD at the ripe age of 50+ years of age, and also for signing the contract for publishing your second book on natural gas in India's energy mix in 2030. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Satish. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Good afternoon, friends. It's a pleasure to be here and seeing virtually lots of friends. May I say some former friends, because a lot of you I used to meet when I was in a cleaner business, and many of you have deserted me. We all talk of coal, but there's so little policy advice and hand-holding in this sector. All of you are donors. You bring money to the projects which have such great value to India. It is this sector where I sit in. We don't need any money. We have plenty of money in this sector, but we could do with good advice. So maybe that is for another spell. So Satish tells me I have 15 minutes, and the topic is very vast to straddle across. And let me see whether I'm able to do justice to it. At the outset, let me mention some former speakers, and I particularly heard Mr. Jha say, India's decarbonization strategy will be difficult, mainly due to the subject I handle, which is coal. With such an overwhelming share of coal in India's primary energy mix, numbers, all of you are experts in your own areas, 55-56% share in the commercial primary energy supply coming from coal, and nearly 3/4 of India's power generation coming from coal. It's not easy to phase down. And we all recognize it. The time frame committed by the government at the Glasgow 2070 is a long enough period. So in a way, if we set about it earnestly, we might do much better even earlier. We'll discuss some of it in my later speech. But just to refer to some of the challenges, the ICAP, which has been mentioned by several people, which I led in the MoEFCC, that is also going to add trouble because it's going to bring a huge demand burden, and especially at the peaking time when the heat is the maximum. Having said the difficult part of the discussion, the comforting factor is that economics is working against coal. So far, all across the world, the dialogue has been on CBDR, and it's been on fund transfer, capital transfer from developed to developing world, etc. So economics is very much at the heart of this entire debate, and it has always been. But some comfort is coming from the fact that with 300 clear sunny days in India, the cost of renewables is today, not on an integrated basis, not on a 24-hour cycle basis, but when the generation comes, that time it is cheaper than coal. And when economics works, then policy, statutes, regulation, people behavior, all of it, they become easier. Be that as it may, today almost every speaker referred to the terminology of just transition. This energy transition away from fossil, it cannot be a mere mechanical, heartless, technology-driven event. There are lives involved, communities, townships that thrive on coal. Sometimes when I tour the eastern states of India, where coal has been in existence for 150 years, and some of those areas I drive through, deserted. We've been reading some novels of deserted mining towns, in South America, in Europe. Similarly, if you drive through some of the Dhanbad, Jharia areas, you will see that the coal came out, and then the entire infrastructure, the economics, the business shifted. And the houses were left behind because they are in wilderness, they are of no value. So the people were left to live in them. Some people are living in them. They're broken down houses. So hospitals and schools that are supported by the coal economy. There are many districts in India. Some reports are coming out where more than 40%, 50% of the district GDP comes from coal. So it's the topic, just transition. In the case of phasing down of coal for India and developing countries, wherever coal is high in the mix, is a matter of very high relevance. So having said this, let me come to the topic at hand. A little sharper focus on energy efficiency. When you talk of energy efficiency and what prize it holds for India, you have to start with the question, what might be India's energy demand maybe 2-3 decades down the line? OECD has virtually plateaued its energy demand. More electrification happening, some of them energy demand is migrating away to power. So plateauing or even reducing. But in the case of India, it's still on the incline. And lots of debates. Will India's per capita electricity demand, per capita energy demand, which is both of them being nearly 1/3 of the global average, will they reach the global standards? And I have always been an advocate, even when I led the draft national energy policy, that India's energy footsteps into the future will not be a copy of what the West has done. We are going to be building in a lot of energy efficiency into it. So, but if India, God forbid, was not to be efficient, the implications are going to be very, very large. Carbon emissions, lots of capital needed, lots of area denuded, exploitation of, energy resources and natural resources. We have a lot of iron ore, we have a thriving steel industry, we have a lot of bauxite, and we want aluminum industry to still grow further. So all this is going to devastate the ecosystem. So if we can become energy efficient, we protect our natural resources, and for the world at large, not only because the climate system is linked, but also that India's energy demand moves the global markets. And what better than, IEA knows it, that from the OECD, now it has lots of partner countries out of India. So most compelling reason for adoption of a strong energy efficiency agenda is to achieve a decline in demand. Numbers again are just a trend analysis. The India Energy Security Scenarios 2047, which we led and made in the NITI Aayog, it says that in the reference scenario, let's say 2040, the energy demand would otherwise be 18,000 terawatt hour, all of it put together. and it could be brought down by more than 22%, 23% to 14,000 terawatt hours by mere adoption of renewable energy, energy efficiency. So energy efficiency, personally, I'm a great believer, and I keep watching the success that we achieve, let us say, in LED and somewhat in PAT and some of the other areas. It needs to be driven across the 4 demand sectors. And I think a lot of potential still exists. So I'm very hopeful. And that is why I've always, in my modeling effort and my discussions, I've always said that India's energy service requirement is going to be met at a much lower level of per capita energy delivered or per capita electricity delivered. Another interesting finding of these researches and the work that we did in NITI Aayog was that the maximum potential of achieving decline in demand actually lies in non-electricity consuming sectors, which is a brainer. Because when electricity only comprises about 16% in the final energy demand, and as we are electrifying our villages, homes, gadgetries, air conditioning penetration, all of it is coming LED, 5 stars, and through efficient means. So in fact, these modeling results have said that the efficiency gains in the reference scenario to what we might achieve are much lesser in electricity, but just maybe 4%. But a lot of it lies in the non-electric sector. Now, flowing from these 2 analyses which I just shared, what follows is that energy efficiency, perhaps will receive attention as we go along, but we need to be very sure. It raises some questions in the context of India. So these are these 3 questions which I wanted to share with all of you. Where should the focus of energy efficiency be? Right now, the amount of focus that we see in the power sector, actually it should go to the solid and liquid fuels sectors. Number 2, with nearly 2.5 to 3x likely growth in energy demand in 2040 and thereafter, shouldn't the focus be more on locking in energy efficiency into the new energy growth strategy that we build, rather than on retrofits? So I'm very happy about PAT, but the real gains, the real low-hanging fruits lie in the new steel plants, the new, whether we should go the blast furnace route, or we should go the electric arc furnace, or the hydrogen route, the DRI route. This is the second set of questions. And then a very, very direct question which we even raised in the national energy policy was, where should the seat of BEE be? Should it be identified more with power, or should it be in some place where it straddles across sectors? So, all of you are from the energy domain, and you would agree with me that these are questions which need to be, some, policy advice needs to come. World Bank is here, IEA is here. So all of you need to bring us some international experience. I will move on to, what is the present state of play in the energy efficiency, whatever institutional mechanism we have. We are trying to do the best of our jobs. ESL is a great trailblazer. The LED experience is a global success. But as of now, the focus that we have on renewable energy, that needs to be repeated in the case of energy efficiency. So some helicopter view thoughts, because these have been under discussion for a very long time. I remember way back, even in 2016, 17, in NITI Aayog, we saw the ESCO movement had advanced in a big way in China. But in India, I'm talking 5 years down the line when we noted it, it is still to make a major headway. In Coal India Limited, where we use such heavy dumpers, HEMM, heavy earth moving machinery, and we have large footprints, we produce almost 2.2 million tons of coal every day. I wanted a complete makeover, in LED lights, electric mobility, pumps to be changed, etc. But we really couldn't find good ESCOs or even energy service companies to do the job. Data disclosure. This is something I learned, from many colleagues, Satish, the main of them, that when you disclose data as to what you are consuming, what you are doing, then it brings in interventions. Strong linkages with climate action. See, climate action, at least the experts understand, stands on these two pillars: energy efficiency and renewable energy. But when the policies and schemes, etc., are conceived, that needs to be strongly built into our programs. Major energy consuming sectors, as I mentioned, let's say mining. Mining is a very large energy consuming sector. In my own sector, coal, we are such heavy consumers of diesel. This is where we need interventions. I have been trying to get LNG into my sector. So with a lot of difficulty, one pilot of converting one heavy dozer to LNG is going on. I would welcome if there was electric mobility, which I think is still some time away. Life cycle costing is a concept we all acknowledged that in procurement, the government needs to build it in. There's still lack of authoritative knowledge so that we can make it a tender criteria, a procurement criteria. So these are some large, tickets on which, if we were to achieve early harvest, we need to work on some of these fast-moving items. In the end, let me say that I'm a great believer in energy efficiency. I saw little projects deliver huge results, and I think there's enough knowledge to spread it around. First, you bring in energy efficiency, reduce demand, and then you let renewable energy meet its end. So this is in India's decarbonization strategy. Energy efficiency will hold great relevance. The way our energy demands are rising, I am facing a huge demand for coal. There is so much pressure on the Ministry of Coal, especially after the international prices of coal shot up, to deliver coal, meet the demand. People don't want to import, people want it domestically. They want us to open new mines, etc., etc. So if there was energy efficiency, there could be a balancing of the demand, especially if India has committed to phasing down of coal. It's high time we started working on it right away so that we don't build in large infra and then we have to find ways of drawing it down. So in the end, the organizers wanted me to when I close my speech, to request all of you, ladies and gentlemen, that should you want to revise, add your comments. So Satish, would you like to take over or leave the floor open to people who might want to come in? Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, sir, very much, and really covering a wide gamut of issues, and really not painting a rosy picture, because we all understand, I think, that India's decarbonization journey is going to be hard. And even though we have to do more than I think the Western world did when they developed, but still we are going to be facing significant issues and challenges, whether it comes on phasing down coal, whether it comes on climate investment, whether it comes on, I think, ramping up energy efficiency and renewable energy. So maybe I will just leave the ground sort of like floor open for any other inputs or interventions that speakers would like to make. We do have like about 5 minutes before Mr. Anil Jain will leave. So anybody who would like to probably come in and share like a very short intervention, because we would like to give as many people as possible, I think, whatever they have heard from Mr. Jain and what they want to share.
Satish, I had a question. Can I?
Yeah, please.
So, sir, thank you very much for the very interesting points that you made. So I had a question that might be a little bit naive, so I hope you'll forgive if it's not. But, you mentioned the economics of coal and that, it has, in many cases, coal is not the most cost-efficient way of supplying power. So I was wondering, what would it take for India, like if we identify the 100 most oldest or the most polluting coal plants, what would it take for India to shut them down? Is there any such policy in the offing? And what kind of support would you need if this were to happen? Thank you.
And maybe, sir, I will request if there are any other.
I can give another 10 minutes. I mean, I must do justice to the
Okay,
job I took. Let me collect some more questions and then maybe I can come back.
Yes, sir.
I mean, I'm sure this is not meant to be questions for me. It's meant for people to comment. So if there are some, when I make my 2-minute contribution at the end, maybe I'll address some of these issues.
Okay, all right, sir. Sirish, yeah.
Satish, thanks. Mr. Jain, thank you so much for outlining and very comprehensive. On the topic of just transition, which was kind of repeated throughout the session, you said there would be areas where you would like to welcome certain ideas and suggestions. So I just want to think what the ministry is thinking and what the government is viewing just transition and what's the lens you are taking and what we can do in terms of addition to the research and evidence that we are generating and making it available through our partners, and what else could be an area that we could support. Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment from the U.S. Perspective. And I don't want, Secretary, I don't want you to feel that your old friends have abandoned you, because the United States certainly has not by any means. However, we have shifted our focus. So I'll just give you a brief example. When I worked here 15 to 20 years ago, we worked very closely with the National Thermal Power Corporation on clean coal technologies and actually helped NTPC starting up what was called the Center for Power Efficiency and Environmental Protection. And we did a lot of really terrific work. And I think that helped NTPC move more toward renewable energy, and now they actually have a whole branch dedicated to renewable energy, which is fascinating given their thermal beginnings. But as you rightly pointed out, India certainly relies on thermal power generation, as does the United States. So we're both in this together, and the issues are not just technological. They are social, political, economic. And when you travel in Western Bihar, well, it's like traveling in West Virginia in the United States, communities that are heavily dependent on coal mining that feeds into our power structure. So we'll continue to work with the government and people of India on these issues and recognize that they will take time. I think it's important to maintain that vision to allow both of our economies and societies to move away from thermal power generation, but recognizing that this will take time. Thank you.
Yeah, Matushi, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to meet you again, Mr. Jain. Just wanted to add to say that some of our the think tanks that the foundation has supported is working with the Ministry of Coal, and would really welcome an opportunity to discuss your technical assistance requirements at some point in time soon. Thank you.
Anyone else wants to make a short intervention? Okay. Tobias.
Maybe just to assure you, Dr. Jain, that Germany really is interested to strengthen the cooperation with Ministry of Coal itself. So open to any discussions on this.
Satish, I had a question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
My question is same as what Shirish asked earlier. So I just wanted to flag the same question on what kind of policy support would be helpful to the ministry or to the state governments which are likely to face transition aspects in coal? And the link to that question is that is the issue more, the policy support is more relevant at central government level or at state government level? How do we structure our work?
And Melanie, any comments from you before we revert back to Dr. Jain? I think Melanie looks like she's having some issues with internet. So, Melanie, do you have anything to add, or should we give the floor back to Dr. Jain? So, Dr. Jain, over to you.
Thanks, Satish. Thanks, everybody. Very quickly, Mr. Jha's, point that looking to the economics of coal where it doesn't work. So, what would it take to shut down inefficient TPPs, etc.? Though this question is actually for the Ministry of Power to answer. But from the energy policy perspective, the work that we did, I think power sector experts over here, they've been advising that, these inefficient power plants could serve as peakers, they could serve as, capacity generators. Anshu has done a lot of work on this, others also must have. So many of these plants are, owned by state GenCos. So they are state government-owned entities, lots of people dependent on them. They were built in an era when there was an administered pricing. Even now that continues, pass-through of costs. Big colonies came up, townships developed, jobs, livelihoods. So there's a lot of advice which comes from the developed world. Like we were studying the UK energy transition, and when they were building up the large wind capacity which might come from Scotland and the North Seas, that time they were saying that when they do the stress analysis, and imagine a year when it is freezing cold, it snows, and the wind declines or the wind declines sharply, then you need standby generators. And their cost is, then they have to be kept alive. Their cost is socialized across, and they're kept alive. So when there is a decline, they can come in. That kind of a policy, once it comes in, you assure these guys that they're not going to go out of business. Now, can you imagine, since you know India so well, in Punjab, there are 2 plants owned by the state GenCo, highly inefficient, very expensive to transport coal all the way from eastern India to that place. But they're keeping it alive. Because in the paddy season, when Punjab's power demand goes up from 6,000 megawatt to 12,000 megawatt, 13,000, that is the time when they get it going. Now, I don't know the sense if they were to enter into the market and sign up some contract for that period, whether it would make better sense. So I think it's economics will ultimately tell them that, look, this is the better way of doing it. But if somebody could handhold them, World Bank could advise them, that would be one way. So Shreesh mentioned about, and thank you, the offer of assistance, partnerships, working. What I always felt that many of these, India's problems are gargantuan. To get India to phase down coal, to sort out the problems of the just transition, it is going to take, I don't know, maybe $1 trillion or something like that. And that money is going to be generated in India. I'm pretty sure, having put in 36 years in civil service, India will find its money. We need some time, and that is the time the Prime Minister has stated. But the hand-holding, the advice, let us say the biodiversity studies in the coal-bearing areas. Anshu raised a very important point. Does this assistance need to be given to the center or to the states? I think it needs to be given to the states. Can somebody go and tell Jharkhand that, look, you are at maximum peril because Jharkhand is heavily dependent on coal revenues. So somebody should go and work with the Jharkhand agencies, economic agencies, the state institute, maybe some universities there. ISM Dhanbad is there, IIT Kharagpur. They keep working on technology. Go and work with them and tell them, in these scenarios, this is the way your income is going to just evaporate. And you can't go around with a begging bowl all over the world. So the state fiscal situations, I was seeing a report that the number of people who depend on coal sector in these districts formally are actually smaller than the number of people who depend on them informally. And those guys never get counted. So I think knowledge, coal mine closures, we sit on large real estate. We keep hearing in Australia, somebody's developing a golf course and a real estate township on former coal mining areas. Now, these things were never thought of. We thought coal is going to go on and on and on. Now, it's about time. Jharkhand seriously lacks land. When I want to rehabilitate Jharia, fire-prone township, I'm telling them, give me land. I'll make a smart city. I'll fund it. Jharkhand doesn't have land because these are the states which are heavily forested. 40%, 50% area is already under real cover of forest or recorded forest. Jungle Jhadi, people who know India know it. So they don't have land. So can we put Coal India's land to a very good use, some advice, consultancy? And so these are the things which small projects. Coal India is very competent organization. They have 30,000 executives. So you work with Coal India in Southeastern Coalfield in Chhattisgarh. You work in Mahanadi Coalfield in Bhubaneswar. We will fund those projects and bring some technology, bring know-how. Tobias can bring some technology from Germany. They are closing down coal before us, 2030, he says. So these are the things I think we need to work on. No major $100 million, nothing of that sort. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jain, again for responding to some of the queries and questions that were asked. With that, I just want to once again thank Dr. Jain and all the other speakers, Tobias, Sirish, Matushi, John, Abhas, Anshu, and Melanie. I think who was having some issues, so I think we have lost her, for making this session so enriching and opening hopefully some new pathways and some new peaks into, I think, how we can have a holistic and a more robust decarbonization strategy for India. Thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Afsha for some closing remarks.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Satish, and a big thank you to all of you who joined in here today. I really must say this was an incredible dialogue, and we can't think of a better way to be ending our day one of FEED 2022. So with this, I think we come to the very end of our session and also day one of FEED 2022. I'll quickly like to thank our platinum sponsor, that's Danfoss, our gold sponsor, Tabreed, our silver sponsor, Saint Gobain and Smart Jewels, for helping make this entire event a big success. Also, a very big thank you to our networking and outreach partners, that's Griha, Ishre, Rama, and the India Smart Grid Forum, that is the ISGF. I'd like to inform all our delegates and speakers that different screenshots, learnings, quotes, etc. from the day can please be posted on Twitter and LinkedIn. And while doing so, please use our hashtags designed for the event. You are soon going to start seeing them on the ticker on your screens. So that's going to give you a hint of how you can go about posting things. We have a very big day coming up tomorrow, which starts at 10 a.m. in the morning. I'm sure all of you have the agenda to all the different talks we have coming up. So thank you very much. And I hope all of you join us for day two. Lots of more discussions to happen yet. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks a lot.
Wir
Bye.
Linke.
Bye.